Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 26th of March 2025. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy K8ZT.
Hello.
And me, David G7URP. Lovely to see you again. On tonight's show, the second part of our course on VHF and UHF with Anthony K8ZT. We take a look at how satellite technology is no longer just for us amateurs. And we find out what on earth this is.
No quirky comments?
Well, no, thanks, Tammy. Well, no, we've had a lot of entries, I must admit. Do you know, it does show that if we found something at home that we don't know what it is, we've just got to put it on this show and they'll tell us.
Fair enough.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll be returning to that competition in a little while. Now, I will make no apologies for saying this will be the last time that I push this on NARC Live. Because our annual general meeting, our AGM, which I know can be boring affairs, but I promise ours won't be, is next Wednesday, the 2nd of April. I can't believe I've been talking about this for weeks now, but it is really important to us. There's lots of things that you can be involved with. So if you are a NARC member, let's just go through all the ways that you can be involved with that special evening. So firstly, as you know, it is also our entry for our construction competition. And one of the reasons we run that on the same night is to add a lot of interest there. So it isn't just a meeting. It's a display as well. So if you have made something, so firstly, you need to be a member of the club. Secondly, if you've made something, as long as it's your own work, it can be from a kit, commercial kit. It can be half made by yourself and half, someone else's design. It's the quality of construction that's important, and that will be displaying those between 7 o'clock and just before 8 o'clock next Wednesday at the school. So if you've made something, and by the way, it doesn't have to be made in the last year as well. That's not part of the judging. Please do bring it along, put it on a display, bring a little bit of details, maybe even if that's just a little name badge, what it is, or maybe if you've made it from an article or a series of articles, you could bring those along as well. Something like that, because this is not only going to interest the judge, but it's also going to interest all those who come along to have a look at what people can make. And if you are into construction, I know you'll feel like me, and it's a really important part of the hobby to sort of stress to people that they can make things that are really quite good. You're not just intimidated by these wonderful touchscreen transceivers and things nowadays. There's lots of things that you can make for yourself. That includes aerials, by the way, as well. Sometimes people bring a different antenna they've made. So that's construction competition. Please, if you can get there for about 7 o'clock next week, put it on display. The judging will take place between 7:15 and 7:45. And the AGM starts actually at 8 p.m. meeting. Now, voting for your Speaker of the Year. This is really important as well. The very fact that you're watching this now means you are a viewer of our talks. And it's your opportunity to vote for who was your favourite Speaker of the Year last year. There's a very easy form, which I think Tammy's going to show us. Are you going to show us? Or you're not going to show us?
No,
okay.
I won't go into it.
All right then. Well, we've put the link in the newsletter. We're going to put the links now. Oh, you've actually done that, Tammy. Thank you. Sorry, that's what I meant. The links are on both BATC and on Facebook. But the deadline for this and some of the other things I'm going to tell you about is tonight, midnight tonight, as I've been talking about for many, many weeks now. So if you haven't got round to voting yet, please just click on that link now on either Facebook or on BATC. If you're watching the recording, it's probably going to be too late for you to do that. So please do it now. Vote for your favourite Speaker of the Year. You need to be a NARC member, and that's the only really criteria, and you've only voted once. That's all. The form is really, really easy and just takes probably less than a minute to do it. Now, another thing, we have got quite a lot of names come forward, thankfully, but the team that runs your club in 2025 to 26, that's between now and next AGM, that's both committee members and officers, and the president, in fact. All of those jobs are up for grabs, as it were. Quite a few people have put their names down, but if you wish to stand for committee, you need to do it again by tonight. And the reason we ask for it to be done a week in advance is because if there are more people apply than there are places, then we need to arrange a ballot to do on the night. And of course that takes time to arrange. So you have till midnight tonight to drop an email now. We've had a physical booklet at the club for the last few meetings, which you could have filled in. But anyway, midnight tonight is the deadline. And the other thing that deadline tonight is to nominate which charity the club should support this year. Now, last year, all of the fundraising events that we did raised money for prostate cancer. That was last year's bid, and all of these suggestions come from you, the regular membership. Anybody can put forward a charity to propose, but again, you need to do this by tonight so that we can get everything in place and get everything ready to present at the AGM next week. And the charity that we choose will be voted for by the people at the AGM next Wednesday. So we will tell you about all of the charities that have been nominated, and then the people there at the AGM will put their hands up, and by a simple hand vote with our auditors checking the numbers, that's how we decide which charity we support for the following year, or this year rather. And then finally, as you can see there, any question on the audited accounts. The accounts have been up for a couple of weeks, I think now. They're available as a link on our website. There's also details on our newsletter and our website, and newsletter and on the website. You need to be signed into the website to actually view it, and it's there very clearly at the top of the page. Now, the reason we ask for this, you can ask a question on the night. Our treasurer hopes to be there, but if it's a complicated question or one particular aspect of it, he's not going to have every bit of accounts easy to hand. So if you're let's say you're questioning maybe a particular transaction or something like that, to ask him on the night to be able to just answer it like that is probably not realistic. So it's in your interest actually to send it in advance. We've got a bit of a looser deadline on that, but please don't do it the night before. So the next couple of days, certainly by the weekend, if you can send me or Chris, our secretary, an email about any questions on the accounts, that's what we need to see, please. And I think that's all the preparation. So a reminder again that the deadline for all those nominations and voting on Speaker of the Year is by tonight. That's so that we can get everything organised. If it's like the award, we actually print a certificate and then we announce it next week at the AGM. We put it in a frame and everything else. And all that needs to be done. And they need to be signed and everything. So midnight tonight, and I'm talking on Wednesday the 26th of March. Okay, thanks for that. Let's have a look now at some members news. And one of our members, Martin G7 UGB, is in a play by the Little Theatre Players. It's called Cold Comfort Farm. I think we've got a slide here to show you a bit of the details. It's on at the Sheringham Little Theatre. It's on from tonight until Saturday night. There's even a matinee on the Saturday as well, as you can see there. And I'll just tell you a little brief synopsis of the play. Orphan Flora Post, the heroine of Gibbon's tongue-in-cheek classic novel, likes everything to be tidy and comfortable. So when she goes to live with her eccentric relatives at Cold Comfort Farm, she tries to alter her surroundings and encourage others to greater things. However, this proves difficult. Now, we don't know which part Martin is playing. I don't think it'll be the part there somehow.
Flora Post?
Who knows? Never know. But anyway, tickets are £13. And good luck, Martin. I hope it goes well tonight. You'll be actually looking at it at the time now, 10 minutes into the first performance.
So I don't think he'll be watching this.
No, I don't think he will. I hope he isn't anyway. So you should get there quickly. Now, the other thing that we thought would interest you is, and it isn't strictly speaking amateur, but I think we're used to seeing the sort of experiments that amateurs can do with satellites. And of course, satellite phones have been available for years, but are really expensive. People, go and do sea expeditions and things like that have been using satellite phones. But there's some changes of technology on the horizon. And I'll just put this little slide up now while I tell you all about it. So people in the UK could soon be able to make satellite calls from their everyday smartphones under proposals announced by Ofcom earlier this week. Cutting-edge direct-to-device technology means satellites in space can now beam signals straight to standard smartphones, so they can make calls, send texts and connect to the internet when there is no coverage from mobile masts on the ground. Are there areas where you can't get coverage on the ground?
Just a couple.
I think so. Previously, mobile satellite services from space have mainly been available to a niche group of users, for example on ships and aircraft, with specialist handsets that can be very expensive. If this was more widely available, it would help connect the UK's most rural and hard-to-reach places. This could mean getting a signal in remote villages and up mountains, and could provide vital backup options during outages. Given advances in this technology, Ofcom is proposing to allow mobile networks and satellite operators to use mobile airwaves, called radio spectrum, to connect mainstream handsets in the UK. Now, significantly, in January, Vodafone, that'd be a useful firm to connect up, wouldn't it? Mustn't get involved with that. Successfully made the world's first satellite video call using a standard mobile smartphone up a mountain in West Wales, where there was absolutely no normal signal coverage. This was made possible by Ofcom issuing an innovation and trial licence. This new technology would complement existing terrestrial networks and could eventually result in 100% of the UK having mobile coverage, unlocking the potential of the most rural and remote communities. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? Anyway, I know it isn't, say, strictly speaking, amateur radio, but it is interesting, isn't it, that they've got the, obviously it's some kind of technology that uses, or maybe an app or something like that within a normal regular smartphone that could allow you to use the satellites for all these communications. But you can
already use, like on my phone, it comes up. So you have like where there's no signal, because we do get that around here.
Do we do? Yeah.
And it comes up with a satellite and it says SOS.
Yes.
And you can send your location via that satellite already.
If you were in trouble, sort of thing.
Yeah, and also now I see that some of the car companies, like AA and Green Flag and things, they're using those. Okay. So you can send them your locations via the satellite if you haven't got mobile phone signal.
But the difference here is they're talking about full mobile coverage using internet and things like that, use of the internet as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how that threatens people like Starlink, people already setting up these special systems. Be interesting to see how that develops. Anyway, thought, as you're interested in technology, most of you watching this, we thought you'd find that interesting. And it's a new license, and we're the first in the world, apparently, to try that sort of technology. Enough from me. Over to you, Tammy, for little people.
Yep, okay. Have you how, ghetto blasters are just, boom, boom?
Bit my era, aren't they? 80s and so?
Well, a new take on ghetto blaster. No, you haven't.
I have.
Really?
Yes. Oh, look at that. So that's what you use them for now?
So they're turning them into restaurants now.
Cool, isn't it? Love it. Miniature-calendar.com, new picture every day. And Tammy picks one for us every week. Yeah, that's an FM, AM, FM stereo cassette recorder. That's it. Ghetto Blaster. Didn't used to put it over my shoulder there. You'll be relieved to know.
No.
So what have you been doing? Please keep in touch. The usual way. Send it to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. If you can send it by about 3 o'clock on the day of NARC Live, the next one will be in 2 weeks' time, then we'd love to see it and share those stories with you. Now we come to that competition. When 2 weeks ago I asked you, what on earth is this? And I'll be honest, I didn't know. And I thought, maybe this is really difficult. But judging by the number of entries, this is not difficult, actually. But just reading, nobody's actually entered that. But then lots and lots of people, it's a mammoth entry this week, have entered this. So if you didn't know what this was, we're about to tell you, I think. You want to kick off, Tammy?
I can, if I find the right piece of paper.
I'll start then. Steve G3VA says, what on earth is this? It's a tool for removing watch backs.
Bruce G4KZT, I believe this object is used for opening watch cases.
Stuart J7KBF, this mystery object is a universal watch case opener.
Tony M0TDK, the current mystery item is a tool for opening watch backs. It is adjustable so it can fit many watch backs. It is rather an awkward tool to use and requires some care to avoid damaging the watch back.
Paul G4XBT SQ1NXQ. This week's What on Earth is a watch back removal tool used by watchmakers. They also do a 2-prong version.
Richard G0CFB is a tool for removing the back of screws on watch backs.
Mike M7TTT, it's a watch case opener or back remover.
Padge M7RF, I think that's
I think so, yeah.
Printers, not
printers,
printed very
yes,
well.
That's right.
It's a JAXA key for opening the backs of watches.
JAXA key, I think
that
is. But yeah, that's good. Richard G4RZN, it takes the backs off those watches that have notches in them. I have a couple of these and still use them occasionally.
Keith M7KKO. It's a watch back remover tool. Gets the backs off watches to replace batteries, etc.
Richard G0VCW says, I think the item is a watchmaker's tool. I recall having watch batteries replaced by a jeweller friend, and I saw him using something similar to remove the stainless steel bezel on the rear of the watch. Sort of gripped it like a mini vice.
Bob G6PWS, that's a watch back opener. I have one and all the pins for all the types of watch batteries.
Peter's G6ZRV, hi Tammy, it's clearly a triple adjustable thingy majig. What's it for fine adjustment of gizmos? Hope this clears up the mystery.
I like that one.
I think he
I think
covers
that's
it.
the winner.
Okay.
John 20TWQ, I believe this is a watch. I believe this to be a watch rear case remover.
John M6JWP, it's a tool for taking off the backs of watches.
Martin G6WNN, I think the current What on Earth is a watch back opener. It comes with some additional bits that fit the various grooves and indents on the back of watches so they can be opened for maintenance and repair.
Bob GSTU, the object is a watch cover remover used to unscrew the back cover.
And Phil G4LPP, I think this is an opener for the back of watches.
And Mike G8EY says, watch what you are doing with this. You can unscrew things with this. So, oh, and Tom G8XQD says, back off, it's for getting the back off a watch. Also, it will hold the watch. That's almost a record number of entries.
What do you reckon it
just
is?
about fit on. Well, it would be lovely to say to them now. It's something for, I don't know, for cooking your fried eggs in.
I don't think it is.
But it is.
It is a watch back opener.
And thanks to Duncan M0WTG for sending us that. Oh, and there's it in use, look.
Yeah.
It's cool, isn't it? I am genuinely surprised that so many people knew what that was, because I didn't know what it was. Not that it sounds arrogant, but I should. But
Yeah.
I'm been around a while now, and an engineer, and I've just never seen it. But so many people knew what that was.
Yeah. I think I can see what it might scratch though, possibly.
Yeah, it's good to think. So well done to everybody who entered. I think everybody got it right, and I suppose the guy who said it was a what's it for removing, that was Peter, wasn't it? Who says it's an adjustable thingy majig, what's it for adjusting of gizmos. I suppose he probably knew what it was.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, thank you very much for entering that. Now we've got a new competition for you, and you've got just under 2 weeks to let us know. Let's see if you're smart enough to know what this is or what it's for when I say, what on earth is this? Now we've really helped you here, because not only have we shown you the picture of the tool, but we've shown you at the other end, the working end, the main business
I thought you were
end.
going to say we've shown the workbench that it came from.
No, well, here we have as well.
Could also
What
give you
is
a clue.
that? What is that for? I don't know, maybe it has a special name. I don't know that. But what's it for? You have got just under 2 weeks to let us know. Send your answers to radio@dcpmicro.com by 3 o'clock on Wednesday week. And then we'll reveal what on earth that is. We'll see if any people answer that question. So before we meet tonight's guest, let's just look at what's happening at the club this week. So Sunday, 7 p.m, GB2RS News on GB3MB. On Monday night at 7:30, also on GB3MB, the Monday Night Net. Don't forget, it's not just down to Steve's currently running a lot of them, but please do run one of those nets if you can do. And at 8 o'clock, the CW net on 3.543 megahertz. Then next Wednesday, yes, I'm going to mention it one more time on here. It's April the 2nd. And it's at CNS, and it's our annual general meeting. Really important time, celebrating lots of awards that lots of people will win as well, which are all closely guarded secrets. It's an in-person meeting at CNS School. We meet there between 7 and 9:30. The construction competition and display is between 7 and just before 8, and then the AGM itself starts at 8 o'clock. We hope to see as many of you members there as you can make it. And then, of course, we'd like to see your stories and everything else that helps us on NARC Live to keep everybody in touch. And of course, we have this card, which we're very happy to send to anybody who you feel be cheered from a card from your club. radio@dcpmicro.com for anything for NARC Live. So that's all our notices. And again, it's a pleasure to welcome back Anthony, K8ZT from the States. Hello, Anthony.
I think.
Oh. I think you might be muted, Anthony. Is it possible? Yeah, I
Good
Yeah.
evening, everyone.
That's better. Yeah. Hello.
I bumped the mute button there.
That's all right. That's all right. Good to see you again. Thank you very much for joining. So we just talked. I think last time we met, before we switched off, we talked about the time zone changing, which you've just had a change already, and ours is this coming weekend, isn't it?
Yes, we are a couple weeks into our time change already, and getting evenings with light, which are confusing me. Every time I'm supposed to do something in the evening, I assume that it can't possibly be evening yet. So yes, it's still confusing me. My stomach is still fighting the time change.
Oh yeah, I know. It's going to be the same for us this Saturday evening as well, or I think technically it's 1 o'clock on Sunday morning. We change the clocks forward, so we lose an hour's sleep, but we do get those nice light evenings anyway. So, Anthony, over to you now for part 2 of VHF and UHF. And as always, for everybody at home now, if you've got any questions for Anthony at all, then pop them onto BATC or Facebook and we'll read them to him at the end. But now back to you, Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you. So last time we covered a couple items, and they're all available, of course, in the recording. We're going to jump into week 2, but just a reminder, to get to all of the materials in the slideshow, there's a number of links and resources. This link will take you there, tiny.cc/UKBGVHF, or you can shoot the QR code, and I'll have that available at the end of today's presentation also. So let's look at radios a little more this week. And the first question is, will a handheld work? Of course, a handheld is going to be the most inexpensive way to get into VHF and UHF, and it's probably one of the easiest ways. You have an antenna attached, there's a battery on it, but is it really going to be the best choice? There's a couple issues with handhelds. First is they have a low power output of typically around 5 watts or in that neighborhood. That's not much of a deal breaker as some of the other problems. The next problem is there's suboptimal ergonomics. They tend to have a tiny readout, very small controls. If you have a big hand, you might have trouble with it. And a lot of things are buried deep in menus because there's not a lot of real estate on the front of the radio. They do have a limited battery capacity, although that's gotten much better with lithium batteries than it used to be in the old NICAD days. The biggest issue, though, is the poor included antenna. The rubber ducks that are included on these, the rubber duck is the helically wound antenna under a rubber or polymer coating, as you can see right here, are very poor antennas. Now there's a couple things we can do to deal with that directly. We could address the antenna issue by using an external antenna. It might be a mobile mount antenna, it might be something like the J-pole we mentioned last week, or even a base antenna. We could address the power issue by using an amplifier. These little brick amplifiers typically take 1 to 5 watts in and put 25 to 30 watts out. So you're getting pretty close to what you would do with most mobile radios. Some also have built-in receive preamps, although that's really not that much of a necessity on FM, VHF, and UHF. And just be aware that some of these amplifiers are FM only, some are FM and single sideband both. They're simple to use, but you need a power supply. And you need a cable to connect the HT to the amplifier, and then another cable to connect to the antenna. They're often as expensive or more expensive than simply buying a mobile radio. A typical single band amp is anywhere in the $200 to $230 range. A dual band amplifier can push close to $400. Also, there's that decision if you wanted FM only or multi-mode, and the multi-mode amplifier is going to cost you a little bit more money. But it might be more useful down the road if you get involved with single sideband CW or digital modes. You might be able to deal with some of the ergonomics by using something like an external speaker mic so you can keep the radio at hand's length and bring the microphone right up to you, or possibly a set of reading glasses to read the small display. Of course, to avoid the battery rundown problem, you could power it from a power supply, an external battery, or you can also buy an adapter that would plug into a car's cigarette lighter socket and power the radio up with 12 volts. So now you have a mic, a drive cable to the amplifier itself, a cable to the antenna, and maybe an external power supply. Will it work? Yes. Did it save you money? Probably not. Is there a better way? Yes, definitely. A mobile transceiver, whether it's installed in a vehicle or it's installed at your home station, will give you much more power than an HT. It also has bigger readouts and controls, a bigger speaker and better audio. There's a microphone, external microphone on it, just like for any other radio. There's less accidental button pushing. And again, you can install mobile radio in the house. There's nothing that says you can't. Most of them have selectable power levels, anywhere from 5 to 50 watts, even some 80 watt models. They have always on light backlighting. They have a cooling fan or heat sink to remove excess heat. Removable control heads are very common, where you can mount the control head and put the rest of the body of the radio either under the seat in the vehicle or below the counter or anywhere you want to put it. They have a large amount of memories available, and you can program them to operate different power levels. Here's some examples of single band and dual band or multi-band mobile radios. Here we have a Kenwood, another Kenwood, a Yaesu, and a TYT. Here's some commonly used mobile transceivers, and of course the model numbers are going to change because there's always new models coming out, but we'll look at a couple of these here. Again, just as we had a wide choice with HTs, we have a wide choice with mobile radios, and we also have base radios, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a few minutes. So really, when you're deciding on a VHF UHF radio, you have a number of decisions to make, and we mentioned this last time in that you can also even get VHF UHF radios as a combo with an HF radio. So I have a whole presentation on buying radio equipment. You can click on this link, Buy Amateur Radio, for the slideshow. You can click on the second link, and again, this is what the links look like. They'll take you out to resources, to this spreadsheet, and if you go down to the bottom, you'll see various tabs. Click on the one that says VHF UHF Matrix, and you'll see some descriptions of some of the mobile and base radios that are available for VHF and UHF. There's some other decisions to be made. The first one is whether you want an FM only radio or a multi-mode radio. FM radios tend to be cheaper, they're much more available, they work fine for local communications, for repeater communications. What they don't do is some of the things that a multi-mode will let you do. A multi-mode will let you operate single sideband CW in addition to FM. They are also able to operate digital modes such as FT8 and FT4. They can be used for WinLink. They can be used for other purposes beyond single voice or CW modes. If you are buying an FM only radio, there's also a decision of whether you want an analog or a digital FM. Now this is not digital as in the FT8 and FT4 digital modes, this is digital FM. That refers to modes such as DMR, D-Star, Fusion, etc. And again, that decision of HT, mobile or base is always there. Then there's another decision. There's now a number of inexpensive brands available versus the traditional brands. Quite often the traditional brands have a better reputation. They might have a better build quality, they might have additional features, and they might be much easier to get serviced, but they might be more expensive. Also, do you want a single band radio, a dual band radio, a quad band radio, a tri-band radio, etc.? What primary bands are you interested in? What type of power output are you interested in? Are you interested in buying new versus used? Let's talk about dual band radios for a minute. Not all dual band radios are created equal. Some allow only one band at a time. Others allow the simultaneous use of two bands with a dual receive capability, so you can be listening to two conversations simultaneously. Some, though, are limited to using only VHF in one band and UHF in the other band. Others allow you to make combinations of VHF UHF, VHF VHF, or UHF UHF. Some dual bands allow background monitoring of one frequency while using another band or frequency. Some allow cross-band repeater operation. I have two links here with more information on cross-band repeater operation. You need to make sure that what you're doing falls under your license and is allowed to be done. So just because it can do cross-band repeater operation doesn't mean it's acceptable under the amateur radio rules. Some dual band radios have wideband receive only capabilities in addition to their VHF UHF capabilities. So you might be able to do things like tuning weather bands, aviation bands, or even some of them have HL shortwave listening ability. Although I'll warn you right now, most of those HF shortwave ability is very, very limited. First of all, you're going to need an additional antenna. Second of all, they often do not allow the ease of tuning, fine-tuning in signals very easily. They're much more designed for commercial broadcast listening. So we talked about a number of choices, but sometimes the best solution is actually two radios. An inexpensive handheld that you can put on your belt to use for close simplex contacts while hiking or chatting at a hamfest or rally, etc. Or the second choice might be a mobile or base radio to address the points in the previous session and provide more reliable communications from your vehicle or from your home. You could even take a mobile radio portable and use it for portable operations by bringing a battery cell along with you with an antenna. So here's a typical base station setup. A 12-volt power supply feeding a radio. This happens to be a VHF UHF HF combination, the Yaesu 991. We have a microphone here, and we have a coax running outside to our outside mounted VHF UHF antenna. Or we might be doing something mobile where we have our battery supplying the voltage to the radio. Notice that there's a fuse in both the positive and negative line, and you're much better off running the connection directly to the battery as opposed to going through any other accessory wiring in your vehicle. This particular radio happens to be a quad band radio from TYT. It's the TYT 9800, very similar to a previously discontinued model from Yaesu called the 8800. This operates on 70 centimeters, 2 meters, 6 meters, and 10 meters. It's FM only though. It is not a multi-mode radio, so you can't operate 10-meter single sideband or 6-meter digital modes such as FT8. You can only operate FM with this, but you can operate on 4 bands. Then we need to have an antenna, of course. Now, when you're powering your radio, you need a power supply or a battery, or hook it up to your vehicle's generator through its battery. You can do a couple different things. You can use a suitably sized deep cycle battery that can run when the power is out. You can also use a battery charger system in your vehicle to run the radio. If you're buying a power supply for home use or battery for portable use, don't skimp. Make sure you have enough battery power to be able to do what you want to do. Remember, FM transmissions have 100% duty cycle, so they will tend to drain a battery much quicker than a single sideband or CW conversation. The typical current range for VHF mobiles is about 8 to 13 amps. Read the manual and the specifications to know what you need. I suggest getting a 20 amp or 25 amp power supply. It's not a problem if you have too much amperage, and a 20 to 25 watt amp power supply will allow you to also run a 100 watt HF radio. So if you want to use it with a different radio, it'll fit the needs also. There's two main types of power supplies, linear power supplies and switching power supplies, and there's an article here with more information on those. I'm not going to go into any more detail on this particular talk. We keep talking about them being 12-volt power supplies, but they're actually nominally about 13.8 volts, and as I mentioned earlier, the amperage is the thing that you need to make sure you have enough of. Here's a variety of different power supplies. You could also use a deep cycle battery. You can use a lead acetate battery, typically a gel cell, but I would strongly suggest you look at the newer lithium ferric phosphate batteries. Discharging of the batteries is very important to follow. If you overly discharge the battery, you can damage the radio, the battery itself, or the radio may not function properly. Here's an example of the lithium discharge, and you see it provides power to a much longer use of the radio over time. So here's some of the pluses of lithium ferric phosphate batteries and deep cycle lead acid batteries, and you can notice that probably the only advantage of a deep lead cycle battery is a lower initial cost, but that cost can be very deceptive. quite often these have 300 or less recharges, whereas these may have 2,000. So you may be looking at 8 to 10 times more recharges, which means you're probably going to be able to use the battery 3 times as long. So again, if this battery is 1/2 of the cost of this battery, you're going to easily make up the difference with the longer life of the lithium phosphate battery. Plus it's lighter, lets you use much more of its capacity for each cycle, it's efficient and fast charging, and it stays charged for a longer period of time when it's not being used. One of the very important things, whether you're using a battery or whether you're connecting to a power supply, is to make sure you use the shortest possible length and the biggest wire that's practical for the installation, because if you use very thin wire or very long runs of wire, the resistance in that wire will cause a drop in voltage. Be safe. Observe manufacturer specs for charging deep cycle and lithium batteries. Never use flooded electrolytic batteries indoors or in an enclosure because they generate hydrogen, or even better yet, avoid these type of batteries completely. Do not connect a deep cycle battery directly to the output of your AC power supply or to solar panels. You want to use something called a power gate. This is a type of device that lets them be connected all the time, but switch over only when you need to use the battery backup ability. If you're using a power supply or a battery, you might need to separate it out into multiple leads for different equipment, and there's wired fuse power distribution cable boxes available. So what are those funny red and black square connectors you've seen many times? They're called Anderson power poles, and I've been using these since the early 80s, but during the 90s and early 2000s they became very much the de facto standard for most amateur radio use. Because they are universally usable, if you have these on the end of your radio leads and on the end of your power supplies, you can easily switch out another person's radio that uses the same type of connections. I have some information here with 3 videos on installing properly and using the Anderson power poles. Now, okay, you've convinced me on a mobile radio instead of a rig, but I decide I don't want to install it at home, I want to install it in the car. Well, here's what I suggest you don't do. This is actually a car that I've seen in the past at a radio rally, and I think they had one of every band available in there. What you really want to do is go out and get some good advice on the installation process, and one of the best places to find that is at a website, www.K8ZT. It's a site devoted to mobile radio installations and operations for both VHF and HF and UHF and other bands. So I would strongly take a look at that. There's also a very good presentation from Marty Wohl, N6VI, on going mobile, planning for safe, effective vehicle-based operations. And he talks about all aspects, not just installation, but actually operating your radio from a vehicle. We're going to switch gears now and talk about radio and computer interfacing. Many newer VHF radios have computer interfacing capabilities, but the use of individual interfaces can vary greatly. So just because a radio says it has a computer interface doesn't mean that you're going to be able to use radio control or rig control. Some of the interfaces on VHF and UHF radios are for programming memories only. So you can program the radio with the interface, but you can't control the radio. Some are for radio configuration. What do we mean about that? By setting certain menu values in the radio. Other software is available for cloning, taking a second radio of the same model and pushing all the information to another radio of the same model. So it's the ability to have a radio that's already configured and move the configuration to a second radio. Some of them do provide rig control. This is mainly in the multi-mode radios and the ones that are also combination VHF, UHF, HF radios. There's also digital sound card modes, and some of them can be interfaced for those purposes, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, as I said, most of them have programming capabilities built in as the minimum of their interface capability. As far as programming your radio, in addition to having the radio have an interface, you're going to need 2 other things. You're going to need a cable to connect your radio to your computer, and you're going to need software to run on your computer to do the programming. There's 3 main sources that you can get this software from. Some manufacturers provide software, not necessary for all their models, and not all manufacturers do this, but some of them provide software. Some of it is free, other ones you need to pay for. And sorry about the little typo there. The other place you can get software is from third-party vendors. These are companies that design programming software, and they often also sell interface cables. One of the more common ones is called RT Systems, and I have a link here to RT Systems site. You can go out to their site, you can find out what they have available, and you notice there's a large number of different radio models on the side here. The third option is open source software, and probably the most common open source programming software is something called Chirp. And if you go out to the Chirp site, you'll see more information on Chirp, including the different features it has, the radios it can work with, etc., etc. Now, I'm not going to tell you to use one or another, but I have used all three of these with great success. Software from manufacturers, software from RT Systems, and Chirp software. We're going to discuss the details on programming a little bit more later. But let's talk a little bit about the other types of interfacing that we can do. I mentioned radio control. This is typically found in base multi-mode radios or VHF, UHF, HF radios. Rig control allows us to read the rig information such as changing frequency, the band, mode, etc. into the computer for logging or contesting purposes. Also allows us to do digital sound card modes such as FT8 and FT4. Typically it uses a USB cable interface, but older radios may still use an RS-232 cable, or they might even use a proprietary interfacing cable that is specific for that radio. If you're using something that ends in an RS-232 interface and you needed to get into a modern computer with USB ports only, you need a serial to USB adapter cable. I would suggest you choose a high quality cable. I recommend one with an FTDI chip built in, not a prolific chip. And if you don't know what that means, just look and see whether there's an FTDI chip when you're buying one of these. So that very inexpensive one is most likely going to have a prolific counterfeit chip in it, not even a real prolific chip, and you're going to run into problems with it. I have two complete presentations on the type of things that you can do with rig interfacing, including logging software and general contesting software. I also have another one on FT8 and FT4 and other digital sound card modes that you can go to. Many newer radios also allow you to attach an external keyboard to trigger functions of the radio without even using a computer. These can do things like send a CW memory, voice memory, or they can trigger other functions of the radio. Most of these are very simple interfaces in that they use a matrix of fixed resistor values. When the radio senses a certain resistance, it then carries out a specific function. Here are some examples. This is the Yaesu FH2. This works with a lot of the Yaesu radios, including the popular 991 and some of the other radios out there. You plug it into the radio, you can press the buttons to do various functions. There are also third-party vendors. There's clones of these available, produced by a lot of different people. As I said, the actual functionality of this is very simple, and you can pick up any of these third-party clones very inexpensively. You can also build your own, and I have a link for that if you want to build your own interface. It's from a magazine article in CQ magazine that I actually was the writer of from back in December 2019 that talks about a number of these interfaces and how you set them up to use with your radio. As you'll notice, they basically consist of a number of push buttons and resistors. Here's some examples of some circuits. This circuit works with the ICOM 705. Here's one that works with the Yaesu FT991. It's basically a clone of the FH2 from Yaesu. There's other options we talked about earlier as far as setting up your memories in your radio. You can use the programming software. You can manually enter the information into the radio and then save it, or you can clone an already programmed radio. So let's take a look at each of these in more depth. First of all, manually entering the information into the radio. In other words, pushing the buttons on the radio to program the radio. The pros include no software interface cable needing. You can simply just use the radio as long as you know how to do it. It's important to know how to do this in the field for emergencies. So that's one of the pros of manually entering. Even if you don't have your computer with you, you can reprogram your radio if you know how to do it. Some of the cons: it requires multiple buttons or knob entry, sometimes very difficult and sometimes hard to see or hard to press without accidentally bumping the wrong button. It can be slow and tedious, especially if you're entering many memories into the radio, and it's easier to accidentally make a mistake. Programming software, the pros include much faster for multiple memories, less mistakes. It's easy to use for multiple radios. Once you have it set up for one radio, you can easily but you can easily program other radios using that software. And you might be able to import the listings from another person and not even have to enter them yourself. You can simply pull a file into the programming software with all the details of programming for your area, and it will allow you to program it very quickly. Some of the cons: it requires software and interfacing cable. Sometimes it costs, or sometimes comes with the radio. You will need a computer, and this doesn't teach you how to program in the field. So if you have an emergency come up, again, and you don't have your computer, you need to be able to do manual programming. The third method is cloning. The pros of cloning include that it's much faster than programming each individual radio. There's less mistakes. No computer is required for most of the time for cloning, and it can be done in the field if you have the right cables with you. Some of the cons: it typically can only work with the exact same model of the radio, so you can only clone to a second radio if it's an exact match to the first one. It does require a cloning cable. The cable may need to be DIY. Some of these cables are not available commercially, but they're all fairly simple to put together. Most of them would involve a cable and a microphone connector, because that's the port that is quite often used. So let's talk about manual entry first. It's tempting to use pre-programming, but if you learn how to enter the memories, you'll always be able to do that. So some are fairly intuitive. Other radios definitely need the manual handy. You need to know what the repeater parameters are before you program, no matter which method you're using. So you need to know the frequency of the radio, the offset, whether it uses TS tones or anything else. So it may require multiple steps: setting the frequency, setting the offset, choosing an offset type, turning on CTCSS, and any tones that are required. Your radio may have an automatic repeater shift, also known as ARS, so you might not need to worry about putting the type of shift in, but you may need to. A couple things that I'd suggest before you even do that is, if you have a handheld radio, label it with your call sign, then record the serial number somewhere else in case something happens to that radio. Marty suggests turning off the automatic repeater shift function, and that way you don't have to worry about it. You can just manually program it in so you're not accidentally getting the wrong shift. If it has something like internet polling on the Yaesu wire system, you might want to turn that off while you're doing manual entry so that it's not pulling in other information. And you're probably going to want to turn off some of the annoying beeps that accompany it. So you need to read the manual and know the key steps, and it's going to vary from radio to radio. But typically, it comes down to putting the radio first into the VHF mode. I'm sorry, the VFO mode, which means that you're not in a memory mode. Then you set the desired receive frequency for the repeater, either using the dial or the keypad. You set the transmit power, and for the repeater, you need to put in the offset of plus or minus. If you need tones, you will need to encode the encode tone enabled, and then you need to store the information by writing it to a memory channel. Quite often, the memory channels allow you to assign an alphanumeric name if desired, so you know what repeater it is. You might also want to set up the same repeater memory multiple times, but at different power levels. That'll let you easily change the power level without having to switch anything else, simply changing to a new memory with the same repeater programmed in with a different power level. Some of the instructions might be confusing and you might not remember them, so you might want to put together a little cheat sheet, a little set of short instructions on how to program the radio in the field. Here's an example of a cheat sheet for the Yaesu FT60. and I'm not going to read all this, but you can keep this. Here's another example for one for the Bofang UV5R. And you notice these are small enough you can print them out, put them in your pocket, tape them to the back of the radio, other things. And these are some additional cheat sheets for different models of radios. And every time I get a new radio that someone brings to our club, I usually generate a new cheat information for them on how to set up their particular radio. Now, this programming software, you don't want to confuse it with a couple other types of software. We already talked about the rig control software, so we're not going to confuse it with that. But there's another type of software, and that is firmware update software. Many new radios allow you to update the firmware and provide new features, correct issues with the radio, etc. These are not the same as programming the radio, and you want to make sure you follow the manufacturer's information to the T to make sure it's exactly the way it's done, because improper firmware upgrades could actually brick your radio and make it non-functional. So whenever doing firmware upgrades, make sure you read the manufacturer's suggested procedure and follow it exactly. There's also some remote control software that can be used to operate your remote radio over the internet, via Bluetooth, etc. We're not going to talk a lot about those today, but just be aware that if you have a radio in your car, you might be able to use Bluetooth capabilities to feed it through your vehicle's audio system. So you can get hands-free operation in that way. You might also be able to have a radio set up remotely and access it by using remote control software. When you're programming a radio, it's going to have a very different type of programming for an analog FM radio, where you're simply putting in the repeater programming information, than you're going to with a digital FM radio. DMR, D-Star, Fusion have very specific types of programming software. DMR refers to it as a code plug. You'll hear various terms for each of these. You need to follow the instructions for that specific type of radio. All of these are going to require an interface cable. If you're buying a cable, avoid cheap cables that might use counterfeit chips and require special drivers. Again, if it has an FTDI chip in it, almost every computer is not going to have a problem with it. But sometimes these cables come with the radio, so you don't have a lot of choice. The Chirp software I mentioned a little bit earlier is a free open source tool for programming your amateur radio. There's versions for Windows, Mac, and Linux. It supports a large number of radios, as well as provides a way to interface with multiple data sources and formats to pull in the information, so you don't have to manually enter all the information before you program your radio. So I have a number of resources here you're going to need to read through on your own. If you're interested in using Chirp, you can go to the Chirp website itself, the Chirp Beginner's Guide, how to use Chirp software for specific radios, how do you find the COM port Chirp is using, ham radio programming with Chirp, a tutorial, and some awesome tricks you can do with Chirp programming. In addition, you might be able to find sample Chirp files that meet your needs. Here's two examples. This is Chirp files for UK channels of VHF and UHF operation from G0LGS. You can download these files and use them with Chirp and program your radio using these files and not have to worry about manually entering all the information into Chirp. There's also a series available from M0PZT. You can download these CSV files, which can be used for Chirp and other things. You'll notice it's very quickly downloaded. There it is. And when you look at this, you'll actually see that these files are CSV files, and they can be opened with any spreadsheet program. So here we have that file opened with Excel, and you can see the list of the repeater names, the frequencies, etc. The nice thing with Chirp is I could go in and edit this file and then upload it to Chirp and push it up to my radio, and I don't have to worry about really how Chirp does any of the processes. I can do it here in this simple spreadsheet. I could also remove a line of one I did not want to program into my radio, or multiple lines that I don't want to program. So the fact that you can manipulate these Chirp source files in a spreadsheet makes them much easier to use. Now, we talked about cloning, and this again only works when you have two identical radios. Once you have the first radio ready to go, you can build the cloning cable and it typically does not require software, but you still need to follow the manufacturer's procedures on how to do it. So notice in this case with the Yaesu FT65R, we need to connect between the two microphone jacks using a special cable, but a cable that you could build very easily. You need to turn both transceivers off. You typically need to hold a series of buttons when you turn it back on again, and that'll put the radio into the cloning mode. And you can see this display will show when it's in the cloning mode, and it will show the information being transmitted. Here's the information for a Bofang UV5 on how to do it. And again, you need to hold down this button when you turn it on, not either of these two buttons. Here's an example for the Yaesu 2980 mobile radio, where we make up a plug using the little modular RJ12s, and we only are using 2 lines of the cable, so very simple cable, and we can program. Again, we hold down some buttons and we turn it on, it goes into the cloning mode, and we can push our cloning information across. When you turn the radios back on again, they should both have identical setups. So we talked about programming, both manual and automated forms of programming. But what happens once you programmed your radio and it's not getting to the repeater? Well, you might have programmed it wrong, but we're going to assume that you programmed it right. And let's look at some of the other reasons why it might not be able to be accessing the repeater. Number one, there may be a problem with your radio. This is something that you can easily test by using the radio on simplex to see whether the radio is functioning properly. Could be your antenna's not working, of course. But it may also be that the repeater is out of your range. You're just too far away from it. Or your power level may be set too low to actually trigger the repeater. You might need to bump it up to a higher level. The repeater may be out of service. You may have outdated data for the repeater and put in the wrong frequency. Or again, you might have misprogrammed the parameters. The most likely misprogrammed parameters are the wrong frequency, the wrong split, the reverse of plus or minus, or if it requires a CTSS tone, not putting in the right tone, putting in the wrong tone number, or the wrong tone frequency. How can you test it? Well, you can check all of these settings and then try getting to the repeater. Again, it might involve you getting off the couch and going outside where you have better access to the repeater. So that's another thing that sometimes means you're just not in an area where you're able to get to the repeater. Besides repeaters, you may want to program other things in the memories. You might want to program in the simplex frequencies. And you might say, Anthony, I could just dial those in. But do you remember them? Remember, the simplex frequencies we talked about in our last session are not every given frequency. They're usually spaced either 15 or 20 kilohertz apart on 2 meters and different lengths apart on different bands. So it's kind of hard to remember all the simplex frequencies. So you probably want to program those in also, especially the national calling frequencies. You might also want to program in satellite frequencies if you're going to be using your radio for satellites. And we'll talk more about that later, but just to give you an idea, satellites have Doppler shift taking place. So as the satellite moves from in front of you to behind you and going past you, you're going to need to change frequencies, both on the up frequency and the down receiving frequency. So you can put those frequencies in along with notes such as this is what you want to use when you're first accessing it, when it's mid-pass, and when you're just getting ready to lose it. And by clicking through these 5, you don't need to keep changing the settings on the radio, so it's a very quick way to do it. And if the satellite requires CT CSS tones, don't forget to put them in there. We'll talk about satellite operations next week. Or next time, I should say. Besides memories, what other items should you consider programming into your radio? Many radios now have less knobs and more menu settings for different functions. It was very common years ago to have a squelch knob on the radio. Many of these radios now include squelch as one of the menu settings, so you need to set that in the menus. So items that you may want to set include the squelch setting, dual or single line displays. Some radios come from the factory only showing one line of information, but you can actually convert it to show 2 lines of information. ARS, automatic repeat shift selection, you might want to turn that on or off. Priority memory monitoring, if radio can monitor a second memory, you might want to turn that on. TOT, which stands for transmitter timeout timer. This basically turns off the transmit if you go too long. In other words, the mic gets held down accidentally. APO, on the other hand, will automatically turn the radio off after a given amount of time with no activity. You might want to set the default power levels, the background display settings, brightness, whether the backlighting turns on or off automatically. A lot of radios also have the ability to have a soft key. This is a programming tool that you need to get to that might be buried very deep in the programming scheme, but you can program a single key to bring that up. These are often labeled as P keys or sometimes F keys. You might also want to change whether it beeps every time you press a key on the radio. You might need to adjust wide versus narrow FM. If you're operating in Western Europe, you might want to have the tone calling turned on. Memory modes, memory banks can be switched. If you have weather broadcast capability, severe weather alerts, scanning settings, these can all be changed. You can even lock the keypad so that when you accidentally bump it, it won't change frequency. You can lock the push to talk button so someone wouldn't accidentally transmit when you're having someone else listen on the radio who's not licensed. And you might turn on Bluetooth capability, display color, Vox operation, and there might be additional items if you're operating single sideband or CW with the radio. So that brings us to the end of week number 2 of our VHF UHF, and I'll turn it back to our host and we'll see if there's any questions. But before I do that, I'm going to put it on the link so that you can shoot this QR code or go to this link for all the resources.
Anthony, we're there. We'll leave that on the screen for a moment just so you can take that down. One of the advantages is that if you take a note of that and you refer to the slides there, you can click on any of the links as well. So we just left it there for a while. I can also put it onto the newsletter if you'd like me to as well. So thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you very much, Anthony. We don't have any specific questions yet, so if you've got any questions on what you've heard, maybe observations, maybe you've had experience of things like chirp and you'd like to share it here, then please do so. We have had a note of something from Tony G0MQG, who says, regarding using interface cables with prolific chips, that was one of the brands that you said possibly avoid. Some time ago I got a cable with prolific chips and of course it wouldn't work with Windows 10, but as I have an old laptop with Windows XP and found the cable I had worked, it worked fine with my old XP laptop. I guess the thing is, just like you said, maybe if you're buying a USB to serial adapter specifically for this, make a note of what operating system you're using and make sure that it's going to be compatible with that.
Yes, very much so. And I do know one question that comes up quite often. Very common on a lot of these radios, the handhelds, the interface cables that plug into the radio end of it, as opposed to then that goes to the computer, quite often they require more force than you would assume. So you need to make sure that it's fully seated. Most of these use the microphone jack and the earphone jack for the purposes of programming. So like a very common radio, the Bofang UV radio series, uses this plug that plugs in there, and you have to make sure that it's fully seated. It appears that it's seated and it appears it's going to be working, and you get nothing back. Also, when you're using a program like Chirp, one of the things I always suggest is never upload your settings to the radio until you do one thing first, and that is download, using the Chirp software, all the settings that are already in the radio, save them. Then if you ever need to go back to those original settings, you can simply use that file.
Yeah, that's great advice, Anthony. Thank you very much. Yeah, quite right. Yeah, I've seen a lot of these now. They work with the sort of, as you said, the microphone and earpiece jacks, which are just normally 3.5mm and 2.5mm on most radios, although
yes,
the distance between them can vary. And of course, these cables don't always work between every radio. Even if it fits, it doesn't necessarily just say that it's going to work. But it can be a very useful tool. I know a lot of people at NARC do use Chirp, and I think there are quite a few of them who do have files already created. Either they've created themselves, or they've got downloaded and modified them for Norfolk in particular, so that things like local repeaters and things are all set up in it as well. So So thank you very much, Anthony. It's been a great introduction again, or a detailed look at really part 2 of VHF and UHF. I've got a couple of notes there. I know one of the things that is caught on in more recent years are DMRs, and these are quite different. And I'll be honest with you that it's probably 5 or 6 Christmases ago now that Tammy bought me a radio for Christmas, a DMR radio, and this is a true story. Some of you are going to laugh now because you'll think, well, why does he think that? And when first thing I got it, and it was brand new, and I opened it out of the box, and the first thing it said it needed was a code plug. Now, actually, I was looking for a physical plug. I really was looking for something electronic to plug into it, which I know you're smiling now, and I'm sure lots of people who are into DMRs will know that. But that was a real stumbling block for me, because I really did think that. And it was only when I started searching the internet and thought, well, what do I need for this code plug? I'll make something, because I've got various plugs and connectors, and I'm an electronic engineer. I should be able to do this. But I realised that was a virtual plug, really. It's a piece of software or firmware, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's very similar to the programming files that you use with Chirp. It's just a little bit different format. And one of the things I do want to stress, and I did mention this last time, when you're looking at those digital FM modes, such as DMR, Fusion, D-Star, etc., remember that they are all unique. So you can't use a Fusion radio with a D-Star repeater. So if you're thinking about buying one of the digital FM radio modes, make sure you find out what repeaters in your area and what other hams are using, because you'll find it most useful, of course, if you have the same type of operation of everyone else.
Yeah, and in the end, that's how I got it working. I did download. Someone actually sent me a code plug to work with it. So a code plug, if you are going to get into DMR, it's not an actual thing. It's a piece of software, a code that you put in. Mike G4DYC says, thanks, Anthony, for comprehensive information. Channel spacings are different between the US and the UK and Europe, I believe. Also,
yes.
Are there still many closed, i.e. member-only repeaters in the US?
There are not very many. There are still a few, but they really have lost a lot of the... We don't have as many. One of the things that used to be very popular in the U.S. was closed repeaters that had auto patch capability. That was the ability to use the repeater to dial a phone line and be able to make a phone conversation through the repeater. And that was something that a lot of people really wanted pre-cellular phones, pre-pagers, etc. Matter of fact, my wife and I belonged to a local club that had auto patch capability, and we found it invaluable. She was a ham, but sometimes she might not be by the radio. She might be at home. So that was a very popular item, and sometimes that was on closed repeaters because there was more cost involved. By the way, just want to remind people that in last week's session, I went through each of the simplex frequencies for 2 meters, 70 centimeters, and 6 meters. So those are in the session from session 1, and they're actually about 25 slides in. If you want to share this, you're welcome. You can do that. I have the slide up right now from last week.
Well, there we go. Yep, we've got it now, I think.
Get in slideshow mode there. So this is the simplex frequencies, and you definitely want to follow this. You don't want to get in between these. So in other words, we don't want to go at 145.405 because that's not a simplex channel. It's a simplex frequency, but it's not a recognized channel. You want to, when you go from 4, you want to go to 4125. Then you're going to go to 425, and you notice how the spacing is with it being 125 between each of them. So that's why it's beneficial to put in the simplex frequencies into the memories so that you don't have to worry about them later, because you'll have them all in there and you can just click, 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 and each time you click through a memory, you'll go to the next higher or lower simplex frequency. There's not that many on 6 meters, there's not that many on 70 centimeters, but there are enough that if you put these in, it makes it a lot easier to operate the radio on simplex.
Yeah, okay.
And of course, don't forget about the 145.5. If you put nothing else in, make sure you put the national calling frequency in.
Yeah, that makes it a quick go-to. I must admit, I can see why they've created this new channel. It's actually, Tammy, can we just show that again? I was just going to, sorry, just to go back to that slide. I can see why they've created those new names, the Vs, because there's double the number, but that's so that you can get the intermediate frequencies on these. But I must admit, I don't ever hear anybody talk about them. I literally on the air. Do you? I mean, I don't know. In the States, it may be different.
We do not do them. We do not have names for the channels in the States.
Oh, okay.
And I was very surprised when I discovered these myself. And I did not discover them for 6 meters, and I don't know if they exist for 6 meter simplex. Matter of fact, it was very difficult to find the 6 meter simplex information in very many places. So this slide right here is something that most people are probably going to want to print out, and that's why on the bottom of the slide, if you notice, there's a link that says printable copy. That'll take you out to a nice clean copy that you can print on an A4 sheet of paper, and you can laminate and have it in the shack.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And I will convert that to A4 because it is in 11.5 by 8.5 right now. I'll convert it over to A4 for you all.
We're very grateful for that. I know you've done a lot of work to convert these. Actually, somebody has 2E0JNW says he doesn't think that I think the 440 centimeters simplex exists, but I know that you've done a lot of extra work with your normal slide set just to make it suitable for the UK. So I think it's worth us just saying a little bit word of warning here in case there's something that's missed. But anyway, I don't know if any of you are watching this now. Do you come across Vs? I've never had anybody say to me go to V32 or V38 or V40, which is the calling frequency. I just haven't heard that used very much. But anyway, it's there, I guess, if we want to use it. I thought that another thing that occurred to me, and we're going to leave that slide up just for a little bit longer as well, Anthony. Another thing that I was going to mention was dual band radios. Now, when I started, I remember thinking that a dual band radio, well, that just means it's got two bands. But there are two types of dual band, aren't there? There is a true dual band radio, and also just a two-band radio. Do you mind just going into that detail a little bit?
Yes, and I actually have a slide that goes with that. Let me just get to that real quick here. But there's really three different types of things you need to be aware of, because some of the dual-band radios only display one band at a time. Other ones can display two bands at a time, but they can't listen to both bands at the same time.
And sorry, can I just stop you there? Because I know what you're saying, I think, but I didn't know that. So does that mean that you could see visually a sort of meter of some audio there, but you can't listen to them both? It doesn't mix them both to put through the same speaker?
Yeah, it's very uncommon that the two most common ones are the ones that only show one at a time but have dual band capability, and the ones that show both and have full dual band capability. Quite often when a radio has full dual band capability, there's also two volume settings. So you can adjust the two volume settings independent of each other. So like this particular radio, the TYT 680 that I'm showing in this slide.
Okay, we'll go to that slide if we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
This actually has two channel selection knobs on the left and right. This radio is also very similar to the ASU FT880, which is now discontinued. This is a quad band radio, but it has individual volume controls and squelch controls for both of these two bands that are being displayed. This is a 4-band radio, so you can actually switch the bands, but you can only do 2 bands at a time. But when you have a radio that has full capability, other than when you're transmitting, you can be listening to a signal on both the one on the left and on the right at the same time. So if I keep my radio in my shack here on the local club repeater on the left, and on the right I have the national calling frequency for 2 meters. So I'm using it VHF, VHF. I'm not using it for VHF and UHF at the same time. When it's sitting in the shack most of the time, it's on 2 VHF channels, one being the local repeater, one being the national calling simplex frequency, and that way I can actually hear conversations going on in both of them simultaneously.
Yeah, I just thought, thank you for explaining that, and I just thought it was important because I remember, years ago when I sort of was near starting this stuff, and I just thought that dual band radio is a dual band radio, but it isn't, is it? They do vary.
No, it is not.
So if you do want to listen to two things at once, or in my case, in my car I run APRS as well. So I've got a Kenwood radio in there, and that is a true dual band, because in one part of the band it's doing APRS transmission and receiving, and then the other part of the radio, I can just use that for speech. But you do normally, if you agree with this, normally they do cost more, because inside you've obviously got a lot more electronics. You've got two receivers typically as well inside the radio, so it's going to be more elaborate inside and more expensive probably.
But not that much difference. And really, if you're going to buy a dual bander, the ability to be able to use both bands at the same time, to me, outweighs it. Now, with HTs, the vast majority of dual band HTs can only use one band at a time. They might be able to display two bands at a time, but most of them don't have a separate volume control. So even if you would be listening to two bands, it'd be hard to do. They don't have separate squelch controls. And a lot of people don't realize that a radio like the Yaesu FT60 comes with a single line display, but there's a command you can do to make it two displays, and you'll see both of the bands, both VHF and UHF displayed, although you can only hear one at a time or use one at a time.
I didn't know that myself. So,
yeah,
that's good. Okay, I'll look out for that. Thank you.
And one of the things I'd strongly suggest is, when you're buying a radio, look for a mailing list that matches that radio, a Groups IO mailing list or a QTH.net mailing list, and that's the best place to ask questions. Plus, if you do a search for YouTubes on the various radios that are out there, it'll give you a lot more information. So I would strongly suggest, when you're looking for a dual band radio, that you probably, especially like a mobile or a base station, you're going to want something that actually has dual capabilities, so you can take full advantage of that.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely worth that, especially if you can make use of those extra functions. Thank you very much, Anthony. It's been a great evening again, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time when we have further information on FM and on VHF and UHF.
And please feel free, if anyone has questions between now and then, to save them up for our next get-together or drop me an email. Either way, we'd be happy to do that. So I know that you might think of a question after we're done today, and we'll be happy to try and answer that in the upcoming sessions.
Lovely. Yeah, thanks very much. So thank you to you, Anthony, K8ZT. You just told me just before we started that you've got snow on the ground. So
well, it's melted now. We have bright sun right now, and the snow has melted. So yes.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, I'm pleased to say that the UK has sort of last warmed up, and we're now seeing a bit of spring anyway. Although it's quite cold in the evening, but we haven't got snow. That's for sure. Thank you very much, Anthony.
73, everyone.
73. See you soon. There we are. That almost ends this NARC Live. Just again, a reminder of what's happening in this coming week. We've got the GB Torres News, as usual, on GB3MB on Sunday evening at 7. 7:30, also on GB3MB, we have the Monday Night Net, and at 8 o'clock, the CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. And yes, one more final time on NARC Live for this year, I'm going to remind you about the AGM next Wednesday night at CNS School. We're open between 7 and 9:30. And the AGM starts at 8 o'clock, but between 7 and 8 we have the construction competition and display. So please, I do hope if you're a NARC member that you can make it to see you then. But until then, from Tammy M0TC.
Bye-bye.
And from me, David G7RP. Take care of yourselves. Look after each other. Bye-bye.